Okay, welcome back from lunch. Hope you all got full bellies and happy hearts. My battery is running low, so we need to hurry. Okay. Friction loss, next thing we need to talk about. It's simply the loss of pressure due to friction. As water moves through the hose, those molecules that are rubbing the side of the inside of the hose are creating friction, and that slows or lowers the pressure. It is greater in smaller diameter hose. It's greater at high flow rates. In other words, the more GPM you're trying to push, the more friction loss you'll create, and it's greater over longer distances, which kind of makes sense. But friction loss occurs in all hose. Anytime we're pumping, you're getting friction loss somewhere. Generally, we talked about this right before lunch break a little bit. Lance and I and Brian talked about this a little bit. We are not getting deep into pump theory in this class. You can get really deep into it. These are general statements that are based on our hose loads. Let me go get my power cord for my computer. I'll be right back.
Full stop.
Hey,
So, how was lunch? Did you just take a nap?
took a nap.
I should have made that. Oh. Now, they're waiting. They're gonna take all the time it takes for them to get this.
Now that is an amateur instructor mistake if I've ever seen one.
This is your first one, it's okay.
You only need a 70. No, I've been an instructor one for a while. But I do only need a 70.
He's not even using it. No, I even got your extension cord in case you didn't have enough.
Oh, I've got enough links. No doubt about that.
Nice phone.
Exactly what they're getting.
What you guys are talking about.
Steve can't fire us all.
Okay, generally speaking, based on our hose loads, length, our nozzle types, so on and so forth, on level ground, 50-foot section of 1 3/4 hand line will lose about 10 psi due to friction. That's actually a little bit of a low estimate, okay? So, but remember, the longer your lay is, the more that increases per stick. So, you know, if we start pumping a 300-footer instead of a 200-footer, it's going to be, your friction loss is going to be more per stick because it's on a curve. It's not an exact number. Generally, a 50-foot section of 2.5 will lose about 4 pounds. So, if you got 200 feet of 2.5, how much friction loss should you expect just from the hose alone?
16.
200 feet will be 4 sections. 4 times 4 is 16. Okay. How about 1 3/4?
40.
About 40 or more. That's on level ground. Elevation also adds pressure loss. Okay, so you have friction loss, and you have elevation loss. Both of those together are total pressure loss, or TPL, if you're into algebra. But we're not getting too deep deep into that stuff, just know that elevation loss is loss of pressure due to gravity when pumping uphill. You can gain pressure, you will gain pressure when pumping downhill. The same amount that you'll lose when pumping uphill. Generally speaking, it's 5 psi for 10 feet of elevation. So if your nozzle is 10 feet above your pump, you're going to lose about 5 psi from elevation, plus whatever you lose from friction. So if I'm pumping 4 sections of 1 3/4 hose up a 10-foot hill, my friction loss is 40 psi, my elevation loss is 5 psi, my total pressure loss is 45 psi. If I want 100 psi at the nozzle, what do I need to pump at the pump?
145.
145. That's all. Yeah. So these are all based on these are generalizations. So don't say that I said these are generalizations. But for the way that we operate, these are a good place to start. All right. Nozzle pressure is the pressure at the end of the nozzle while flowing water. That's important. When the nozzle is closed, none of this stuff matters. Because when the water is not moving, you do not have friction loss. So your pump discharge, when you run it up and it says 130 psi on your gauge, and nobody's opened the nozzle yet, when they open the nozzle, that's going to drop. Because it's going to start adding friction loss and things like that. So you got to account for that. The correct nozzle pressure is necessary in order to have the desired flow. So every nozzle is designed to achieve a certain GPM based on a certain PSI at the nozzle, not at the pump, at the nozzle. In order to calculate nozzle pressure, you have to account for friction loss and elevation loss. So if the desired nozzle pressure is 100, and your estimated pressure loss due to friction and elevation is 30, your discharge gauge at the pump has to read 130 psi. Does that all make sense? Okay.
Yes. Is this the main discharge reading, or is this the?
This is the individual discharge. Unless you're only discharging one line, then they should be pretty close. But this is the individual discharge. So if I'm trying to pump 2 lines at 130, my main discharge pressure might need to be a little higher than that, because there's actually friction loss in the pump itself too. But now you got friction loss on both hoses. If they're different lengths, it gets even more complicated. And if they're different sizes and lengths, it gets really complicated. You start pumping them through a wire or different appliance, it gets even more complicated. But just know that generally speaking, you're going to have some friction loss, and you got to account for that at the pump. When you're pumping a hand line or a master stream or whatever, your math needs to happen from the individual discharge gauge to the end of the hose, not the master discharge. The only thing that you're going to take off the master discharge is really nothing. Your master, you need to pay attention to your intake. Your master discharge, you might be able to tell, as you get more experience, you might be able to tell how many more lines can I add and still have pump capacity to get the pressures that I need by looking at your master discharge. You'll never get to it, but your pump's only rated to pump 400 psi. So if you're getting at like 375, you might want to change your strategy. You know, if you're 375 on your master, you're getting really close to pump capacity. I've never seen that happen quite that. I mean, when you're at like 250, the truck's screaming pretty loud. So, all right. So nozzle types. I got a few different kinds of nozzles for you to look at. Nate, will you run in my office? Under the round table, there's a nozzle.
Yeah, vindicator.
All right, so you guys can just pass these around and look at them, not like you've never seen nozzles before, but I'll tell you what they are real quick. That one that Jake is holding is a selectable gallonage 1 3/4 nozzle. This is your smooth bore or solid bore. This is a constant flow and this is another adjustable gallonage, it's a 2.5. So your constant flow nozzle gives a specific flow of specific nozzle pressure. In other words, specific GPM at a specific nozzle pressure. If you'll notice, and this is a Vindicator nozzle, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but yes. If you'll notice on this constant flow nozzle, there's two numbers on the end. There's a GPM and a PSI. What that means is, at that PSI, that's the GPM that you're getting. Generally speaking, you cannot get more GPM out of this nozzle, no matter how much more pressure. You might get a few more pounds, but not much more than a few more pounds. So the only thing you're doing by increasing the pressure at the nozzle is making it harder for your firefighters, because there's gonna be more nozzle reaction. But, so like, pass that around and look at the end of it and look at those numbers. Every constant flow nozzle that I've ever seen has those numbers on the stem, just like that. As a pump operator, I'm not a fan of adjustable gallonage or selectable gallonage nozzles, because anytime that gallonage changes, technically, you should be changing what you're putting out of the pump. So unless there's really good communication, you're not getting the GPM that you want to get. So those numbers on this ring mean nothing, because never in my career have I ever seen somebody switch this and then tell the pump operator that they switched it.
Or think they switched it to something and switched it completely different,
Yeah.
so it doesn't set where it's supposed to be anyway.
Yeah, I can go ahead and say this, it's my class. I don't think these should be allowed to be used in interior firefighting operations. I think they should be outlawed, but,
Flush,
flush is nice.
that's my favorite.
Yeah.
All right, so anyway, those are your types. Your solid stream generally produce more GPM at a lower nozzle pressure. You'll notice on your sheet, on your pump discharge pressure chart that I made, these are based on what I thought our flows were and what I think you should probably start your pump at based on friction loss. Although I noticed on the first one I put 175, it should be 125, according to that nozzle. I thought we had 175 GPM fog nozzles. I wish we did, and maybe we will in the future. But for now, it's a 125, and so that's actually gonna be lower. It's gonna be more like 160 instead of 180. But if you'll notice though, if you look at the solid bore versus the fog, and I said automatic fog, it's actually a constant flow, not automatic, so I screwed that up too. But 180 PSI at 175 GPM, if it was 175 GPM nozzle versus 150 PSI, 180 GPM, what's the difference there operationally? Like, if you're on the end of the line, what's the difference between 150 PSI and 180 PSI at the nozzle?
Third nozzle.
Or not at the nozzle, but generally, yeah, it's easier to operate with a lower PSI, right? Less nozzle reaction is what we call that. So, generally speaking, a solid bore nozzle has that advantage of you get more water out of it at a lower PSI. It's easier to work with. The argument though is, and I will stand on my soapbox all day about this, is you lose a ton of versatility by using a solid bore. There's a lot you can do with the fog nozzle that you can't do with the solid bore. And nowadays they're making 175 GPM fog nozzles, so you're gonna be hard pressed to get me to go to say you should use a solid bore all the time, because I've seen too many times where people were squirting it over the top of the roof like that video shows. But anyway, that's not part of the class, that's just my own personal opinions. Your solid stream, so your fog nozzles, we have those selectable gallonages were on the old pumper. On the new pumper, we're gonna have constant flow nozzles, so they're gonna tell you what you should be pumping them at. Solid bore, you're gonna pump at 50 to 80, generally speaking. You can go beyond that and you can get more GPM, but above 80, you start getting a lot of nozzle reaction. And it's harder to control. That chart that I gave you, the pocket chart, it kind of tells you what those numbers are at different PSI. Master streams, the device alone causes 25 PSI of friction loss. Okay? So just know that right off the bat. With a solid bore, generally speaking, you're gonna pump at 80 PSI, and with a fog nozzle on this, you're gonna pump at 100 PSI. And you really don't have any friction loss between the pump and the appliance. You have 25 with the appliance, so those are good numbers when you're pumping the deck gun. 80 PSI if it's got a stack on it, 100 PSI if it's got a fog nozzle on it. That's easy on a deck gun. Now, yes sir.
Can we talk about how at 50 PSI that thing?
250
325 gallons?
Yeah, I will in just a second. So, those are good numbers, but if you're using this as a ground monitor, you gotta add the friction loss of the hose. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, ours, this exact one, with the ground monitor, is plumbed to an LDH. LDH has almost no friction loss, really no calculable friction loss, so you really don't have to worry about it. So I'm not a salesman for this, but I have used them a lot, and I've seen them work, so I tend to believe somehow or another, as the water's flowing through here, it pulls air in these slots and causes a Venturi effect. So it essentially accelerates the flow. The best way I can think to explain it is it gets the water out of the way faster, so more water can come through. Yeah. So now it's 50 PSI nozzle pressure.
Right.
So
Still, it's just so little.
yeah. So, but the thing is, like, if you look on my chart, we're gonna be running this on a 2-inch line. And I want, to get 50 to 80 PSI, we're still gonna have to pump it at 50 to 80 PSI on the nozzle, we're still gonna have to pump it at 190. 190 is 80 PSI. That's to get 350 GPM. Remember, the higher the flow, the more the friction loss. So because we're trying to get 350 GPM out of this, we have to overcome the friction loss even more. That's why it's such a high number on that chart, because we're trying to overcome all that friction loss. It's not gonna, at the nozzle, it's still gonna be 50 to 80 PSI, and it's still substantially less nozzle reaction than any of those.
So there's no adjustment.
Mm-mm.
You get whatever comes out of it.
It's a straight stream, but it's broken. It's not a solid stream. It's a straight stream.
Not that it would fall.
It's not a fog.
We tried no reach on it then, are you?
It is less than a standard nozzle. But I'm telling you,
Breaker would be.
the 350 GPM is amazing.
Oh,
I mean, like I've went in on apartment fires on these things thinking we're gonna be calling second and third alarms and go in there and open this thing up, and it's just like magic.
Can't be on fire if it's underwater.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's why I got this, because I'm a fan. I like it, and I like the 2-inch line, because it feels like 1 3/4 functionally, but you get 2.5-inch GPM out of it. So that's my case for that. Hopefully the board agrees, because that was $900.
But we already have it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they don't know what I think.
it's ours.
All right, so, yeah, good question though. That's how they say it works. I don't know. All I know is I've seen it work in real life, putting out huge fires amazingly. So, and it might just be because I'm such a good firefighter, but I try not to just assume that all the time.
It's true. So then are we gonna need a adapter to 1 3/4 to 2-inch? Or are we gonna gate it down from a 2.5 to 2-inch?
It'll have a reducer right here. And that's the only, so I got 2-inch line with 2.5-inch couplings, so the only reduction is right here at the nozzle.
Gotcha.
That way it's not reduced at every single fitting. So we're optimizing GPM.
Cool.
So, okay. Remember, pump capacity or any type of capacity is meant, how much water can I get out of my pump or onto the fire, whatever. It's measured in GPM. Your pump capacity, in order for it to be considered a fire apparatus, has to be at least 750 GPM. I put 2,500 on here, and honestly, there's pumps that go way higher than that, but in a municipal setting, you're never gonna see one bigger than that. Industrial, you get, I mean, you got, New York City's got pumpers that can pump 10,000 GPM and upwards. But it takes like 15 6-inch LDHs, you know, pumped from a fireboat and other pumps on it, you know, but, so it's the maximum amount of flow the pump can produce, and it's limited by external factors such as friction loss, water supply, and manpower. So those are the things that we're limited by. All right. Remember that fire pumps are controlled by many different parts and pieces on the pump panel. So you're the controller of those things. That's how you get the water to go where it goes. 3 main sources that supply a pump are booster tank, a static source, and a pressurized source. There's various different kinds of static sources, there's various different kinds of pressurized sources. In order to be an effective pump operator, you must be able to establish an effective fire stream from different types of sources. And I would add under different types of scenarios, or in different types of scenarios. You must understand what PSM and GPI, PSI and GPM are, how to say them, what they are, and understand their basic differences. In order to be an effective pump operator, you got to understand how a pump is affected by friction loss and elevation loss, and you must understand pump capacity. And what you really need to understand is that your pump does have limitations, and that's not your fault as a pump operator. Your pump is limited, you can only do so much. So when everybody understands that the most important tool on the fire ground when there's actually a fire is the fire pump, because without it, we can't get water onto the fire at all, and it is limited. We can only ask so much out of it. But in order to get the most out of it, we need to know what we're doing. So that's the end of the slideshow. And are you guys ready to do the end of class evaluation? I will tell you that you can use your student manual for this if you'd like. You have 13 questions.
Oh my gosh.
One of them is, or actually several of them are multi-faceted questions. So,
13 questions, feels like 25.
yeah, it is not timed. If there's anything on that evaluation that doesn't make sense, or, you know, just let me know so I can change it, or so I can fix it. You guys are my guinea pigs. When everybody gets done, we'll go over it together.
Are we marking on the test?
Oh, I hope so, because I already have.
Oh, you know.
Brian might fall asleep or something.
I don't know.
Probably should check on it.
Has he been gone the whole time?
Yeah.
He's an adult. there was, at one point, I like moved that picture, and I must not have got the lines
I
on.
don't sit you over here. But you have places rather than church.
Oh, okay. Two different steps though, right?
I mean, yeah, all equally as bad.
I think it was supposed to be true and neutral was supposed to be the first one. Thank you.
Do we have to do too much code yet?
Sore subject.
Okay.
I'll tell you the story. We're not on video.
I got a third party review of the story. I got a third party review of the story.
Yeah, I freaking wrote my answer down. And then I was like, what? That's nice.
You driving a pumper today?
I am, yeah.
That's off for Crossley.
Oh, good. We can figure it out.
I would've told you before we, I'll let you go on a fire.
Are we pulling a line today? No, I'm asking, I wanna, can we use that if we do? I didn't know if we're using the deck gun or what.
Have you looked at any of the materials that I handed out?
I've been on calls, I don't know.
Actually, we're just starting and stopping the pump over and over.
We'll do this a different, like after the
My only
fact.
thing is I wanna do that.
Well, we don't have the 2-inch line, but yeah, we can put it on 1 3/4, I guess.
Does our pump go up that high?
We will find out at some point.
Be well into the 200 PSI.
Well, that's what your 190 is what you're pumping at a pump.
On a 2-inch line.
Yeah.
If we put it on 1 3/4, to get the 50 PSI over there, it's gotta be higher.
Oh, yeah, you're right, yeah, it would have to be higher on 1 3/4.
And how are we gonna measure if it's a 50 PSI?
Without, well, I mean, that's where we would use this,
You subtract 4.
this thing.
It doesn't go that high. Oh, yeah, it does. 1 3/4.
190 PSI of pressure loss per 100 feet at 350 per 1 3/4.
So you would need 380 PSI. At that point, I'd be like, you know what, it's not worth it.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna use it on, we're not gonna get 350 out of 1 3/4.
Like maybe once,
Yeah,
say we did.
yeah. In all fairness, Nate and Danny were gone for some of these questions, so,
Yeah, I,
you know, if you need to phone a friend.
like, what's the third pressurized water source?
I only got two.
Third pressurized?
Relay.
Tanker, relay.
Firefighter.
Oh, shit.
So if I put nurse truck, that's
I
got
bet
2
a
in one.
booster tank.
Oh, what?
hydrant.
Nurse truck.
Boosters,
Yeah.
not pressurized.
Oh, no, that's just.
to go over it?
Yeah.
Okay. The part of the fire pump that uses centrifugal force to increase pressure is the number C, impeller. Goes in through the eye, spun by the impeller and out the volute. The main valve, number 2, the main valve through which water is taken into the pump is called master intake. Number 3, the interface that the user controls pump throttle with is called the pump controller. You can tell I've taken a state test or two, huh? Number 4, which of the following types of water sources requires drafting to be performed? Static is correct. Which of the following water sources may or may not be labeled or colored according to GPM capabilities? Fire hydrant is the correct answer. When pumping from a pressurized source, never allow your intake pressure to drop below what? 20 psi. D. What is the maximum amount of time that you should activate the primer? 30 seconds is correct. B. How much elevation loss will occur when pumping up a 25-foot hill? 12.5 psi. Remember, it's 5 psi per 10 feet. Or times 0.5 is a shortcut for that.
I counted 5s, not 10s.
Yeah. So the correct answer was D. 3 pressurized water sources. Hydrant, tanker, relay is correct. And if you came up with any others, I'm open to them. What are the 2 main types of static water sources? Nope. Natural and man-made.
Thanks, George.
Okay, place the following steps for making the pump operational in the proper order by marking them 1 through 5. What's number 1?
Don the proper PPE.
Move PTO switch.
Well, now which one is it?
You're not gonna put your helmet on.
Drop the wheels.
We're gonna throw this question out.
That's very.
Cause we didn't really cover it.
PSIC says.
My thought was, it was supposed to say ensure the transmission is in neutral first. That would have been number 1.
Well.
Number 2 would have been, move the PTO switch from rotor pump. 3 would have been place the transmission in drive. 4 would have been chalk the wheels, and 5 would have been don your PPE because it would be in the pump operator's compartment, right? So, the natural process. So, stupid question, I'll scratch it. This is how we learn.
And so you can place it in transmission into drive, but then insurance in drive also.
Yeah, that's 1 and 2.
So I made insurance in drive as the last one, number 5.
But yeah,
Well,
you need to get back in
with
the drive.
Lance's, what he's saying the engine 71's doing, you do have to ensure that it's in drive. Alright, what's the name of the object?
Low level strainer.
Low level strainer. Label the following parts of the pump panel. The top line on the left is,
Tank valve.
the middle line on the left,
Controller.
bottom line on the left,
Main intake.
valve.
top line on the right,
Primary control.
bottom line on the right.
Tank control.
Correct.
Woo! That's that one.
Looks like everybody passed.
No, we didn't pass, we're sufficient.
Yeah, it looks like everybody, understood the objectives, for the most part. Except maybe the instructor. Let's, at this point, so first of all, before you leave the room, please fill out a class evaluation, and just make a pile on the table over there, so you don't have to put your name on it or showing your, but be honest. I mean, this is for Instructor II, but I mean, I'll probably continue to write classes and do classes on things, so if I suck at it, let me know now, or it's gonna suck for you, but, and it may suck for you anyway, but anyway, I digress. So what we're gonna do next is we will set up, because my course states that this stuff will be set up before we start. We need to set up the portable water tank, fill it with water, have a supply line that reaches from the hydrant to the truck, pre-established but not hooked up, so laid out but not hooked up, okay? And then we can go ahead and pull an 1 3/4 pre-connect and have it played out. Does that make sense? So we'll use pumper 71 and we'll just do it out back here. So wherever works best for setting all that up, whatever you think. I'll give us about 15 minutes to get it all set up and everybody to pee and all that stuff, and we'll get it done. You will need your skill sheets. There's 2 skill sheets. Those skill sheets, there's 3 lesson objectives. Both of those skill sheets cover 2 lesson objectives. One of, pumping from a pressurized source also covers predicting pump behavior, because you're switching from the booster tank to the pressurized source. And then same thing with static, you're switching from booster to drafting. So each skill sheet covers multiple objectives. So just wanted to make sure everybody understood that, both here and in Jeff City. And yeah, okay, break, ready, break.
You want to test with
Yeah, just put them on the table. You don't mind?
Yeah, names aren't